Today we'll be making some value charts in color using gouache. The supplies you'll need include Bristol paper, which I recommend taping down so it doesn't warp, some brushes, as well as your gouache, a plate for mixing, and water and a paper towel for keeping your brushes clean. In terms of the gouache we'll be using, you'll need a white, your primaries, so any red, yellow, and blue, as well as black. You may also want to map out a grid on your Bristol paper that corresponds with the number of hues and values that you plan on mixing. I just mapped out a 1" by 1" grid that I'm going to play around in. When setting up my palette, I like to set it up kind of like a color wheel, so my red, yellow, and blue triangulated across from one another. For the purposes of this demo, I've had to kind of condense my palette so that it fits within the camera frame, but normally I would take the whole palette to give myself plenty of space to mix colors in between my primaries. I'm also going to set up my black and white across from one another. It's kind of difficult to see from this point of view, but I've gone through and labeled at the top, going from left to right, the different hues that I plan on painting in each kind of column, and then from top to bottom, the different values that I'm going to paint, with lightest at the top and darkest at the bottom. I'm going to start off with just the pure hue, that's the pure color, and I'm going to paint that in the middle square of one of my columns. I'm starting off with the red, and then I'm going to get a clean paintbrush and do the same thing with the yellow and the blue. You'll notice that I've given myself space in between my red column and my yellow column. Likewise, I'll have space between yellow and blue. This allows me to have room to paint value scales for my secondary as well as my tertiary colors in between my primary scales. So we'll be doing our primary scales first and then moving into the other colors. Now that we have our pure hues down in the middle, this is kind of like our middle value tone, we're going to be painting some tints, which are the lighter values. We'll make those by mixing our pure color with a little bit of white. So I'm going to start off with my pure red and mix just a little bit of white into it, adding white or red as needed to get the right value. I want something just a little bit lighter than my original pure hue. I'll then add a little bit more white to that first color that I mixed, and just continue down the line, adding even more white for the next values until I have my very lightest value. I'm going to repeat this process, so this process of mixing my tints for both yellow and blue. I'll speed the video up here so you can see that process fairly quickly. I always try to give myself enough space on my palette so I can mix the colors really cleanly and not get them muddied. Once you have your tints painted, you'll want to clean off your brushes really well, and we'll move on to the shades. Whereas for our tints, we were adding white to a color to get a lighter value, for our shades, we'll be adding black to a color to get a darker value. There are lots of other colors that you could use to shade or create darker values. I personally really like using raw umber. I find that has a little bit more warmth than using black to mix into my paints, but for the purpose of this demo, we'll be using black. Again, I'm going to start with my pure color and add just a little bit of black into it. A little bit of black goes a long way, so kind of start out with just small amounts and work from there. You'll see that I went too dark too fast in the red and had to go back and color correct my values. I'll repeat the process with yellow and then with blue. I find that mixing the shades for yellow is always really challenging because yellow is such a light value color to begin with, and when I'm adding black, things can get super dark super fast, sometimes too fast. Now that we've got our primary value ranges in, we can go in and do value ranges for our secondary colors. Again, I'm going to leave myself some space in between the primaries and the secondaries so that I could paint the tertiaries if I wanted to. Ideally, I would have given myself more space on my palette so that I could really cleanly mix my secondary colors in between the primaries. Unfortunately, because of my setup with the camera, I don't have much space in between my colors for mixing, which proved kind of challenging when I was doing my values for the secondary colors. Hopefully you can give yourself plenty of space for mixing and really take up the entirety of your palette. I'm going to take the same approach as before, painting first my tints for each of my secondary colors and then going through and painting the shades for each one. I'll just mention again that it's really important to keep your brushes clean to avoid muddying any of your colors and to get kind of the most accurate value ranges that you can. Once you have your secondary value ranges in, you could go ahead and do your tertiaries. So those colors that sit in between your primaries and your secondaries. That would be like your red oranges or your yellow greens. You may also have a warm and a cool version of each of your primaries in your gouache set. So you may want to do a value scale of your warm red next to your cool red, and your warm yellow next to your cool yellow, and so on. For my purposes, I'm going to wrap up here, but the more value scales you do, the more you know about the colors and the values you're able to mix within your palette before you even start a painting.